Welcome to Off the Page. It's great to be with you. There's a quote that hangs in my bedroom from Thomas Merton, and the quote reads, "Let us come alive to the splendor that is all around us and see the beauty in ordinary things." This is its own daily invitation to me, and one that I frankly do not always accept. For most, I think the busyness of life and work, family commitments, our ever-lengthening to-do lists, they can sweep us into a lifestyle of frantic doing and accomplishing that can lead to, as the popular saying goes, forgetting to stop and smell the roses. And in this doing, I've noticed, at least in my own life, that wonder and praise can sometimes take a back seat as I become hyper-focused on what needs to be done. I have a feeling that the Merton quote hanging in my bedroom will remain there for a long time because practicing presence is a lifelong journey. But what a wonderful journey it is as our awareness for divine goodness and beauty and grace deepens and expands within us, and as our desires become channeled in a way that leads us toward true joy and true peace. There's a book that recently came out that addresses this exact topic, and it's called The Holy Ordinary, A Way to God, and it was released about a year ago in October 2024 by Monkfish Publishing. Its author is Mark Longhurst, today's guest on Off the Page. Mark is a writer, an ordinary mystic, and member of the new monastic community of the Incarnation. He works as the publications manager at the Center for Action and Contemplation, and he's a former pastor who served United Church of Christ churches for 10 years and worked as a faith-based social justice activist in the Boston area for 10 more years. A graduate of Harvard Divinity School and a longtime yoga practitioner, Mark lives in Western Massachusetts with his family. This conversation was wonderful, and I cannot recommend Mark's book, The Holy Ordinary, enough, available wherever books are sold. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with Mark Longhurst. Enjoy. Mark Longhurst, welcome to the Off the Page podcast.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time. Your wonderful book, The Holy Ordinary, the subtitle is A Way to God. It came out last October. What led you to write this book, and what kind of spirituality does this book invite readers to consider?
What led me to write this book was my own quest to be on a deep path of spiritual transformation and contemplative practice, but to have a job and have kids. And so this book is really me trying to make sense of it all. What type of theology is helpful for folks like me trying to live this type of life, and what type of practical spirituality does that involve? And so these are short reflections that really took, another thing people sometimes ask is like, well, what was it like writing a book? And I was like, well, it took about 10 years because these are short reflections, some of them adapted from various articles or talks that I was a pastor for 10 years, sermons and such, biblical study. And when you have a job and kids, it's hard to find sustained time to work on big projects like that. So I was on the 10-year plan of publishing my first book, is what I like to say.
Well, that's one of my favorite things about the book is you could really, it's almost like a compilation of essays. Sorry if that sounds like it's like cheapening it at all, but like you could read it as a devotional every morning, as I did as I was reading it, just to like help get you centered. It reminded myself of a lot of truths that I tend to neglect. And I'll be honest, I mean, part of my draw to this book is my own personal struggle. I mean, a lot of, you hit on it, a lot of days I just feel frantic, like always off from one thing to the next. And I've mentioned on the podcast before, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I hate to say it, but there are, more days than I'd like to admit that I'm tired from work, I'm tired from coaching, the stress of this or that, and I'm just trying to get them to bed. I'm just trying to get them to bed, and I'm missing out on some of those ordinary moments. And that's not to beat myself up, but it's to just name the landscape that I think a lot of listeners may relate to, is that the holy ordinary is right there, but it's difficult sometimes to get out of that kind of frantic sense. So can you speak to that a little bit? I know that was a big inspiration for you in writing the book, as someone who is juggling a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. One thing I like to also say is that this book is an aspiration and not a fully lived reality, and maybe it won't ever be. And I say that because I'm the same way. I wake up and immediately it's like, what do I have to do? What's the list? How do I get the kids out of the door to get them wherever they're supposed to be? And shoot, maybe I'm going to try to squeeze a run or a workout in, but oh, darn it, that didn't work. and the day hits me like sometimes a fast train, and it's off and running, and then it's over. And I'm tired, or I've drank too much coffee, and I just want to watch Netflix and go to bed. And so how do we create time to really be present? How do we create time and awareness to recognize a deeper dimension of life that is underneath and really holding all of it? I'm convinced that my capacity to touch back into that deeper reality is really integral to how I show up in the world with my wife and with my kids, in the workplace. And so it's an ongoing quest. And this book is a part of that ongoing quest to touch back into that deeper life. But it's a struggle, an aspiration. And I think, and really the other thing I would say is it feels to me like, not like I'm charting uncharted territory, but this question of how do we do this feels historically new to me, because a lot of the folks who've written about mysticism and contemplation have come out of monastic traditions. Yep. And we're in this thrilling, exciting time where the riches of the historic contemplative traditions are really available to everyone, including parents, that, we could never join a monastery, we could never, and who could go on, month-long retreats, or 6-month pilgrimages. Some of us are fortunate enough to be able to do stuff like that, and that's a growing practice. But it seems like we're living in this exciting time in which these riches of spiritual depth from various contemplative monastic traditions are no longer behind cloistered gates. They are available to parents. They're available to people with busy jobs. And it feels like a little bit of uncharted work to me to really wrestle with, so what does that all mean in lived reality for busy people who don't want to give up on the depth of the spiritual life? And yes. So that's part of my exploration here too, is I'm not convinced that we can't have that and taste that depth too. It's right in the midst of the chaos. It's not separate from the chaos. And that's a wisdom nugget that I think is true, and a paradox for us to explore and live into.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've mentioned depth, you've mentioned awareness to a deeper reality. Can you put some more language around that? Like, what is this deeper reality that we are trying, feels like striving, but really it's opening your eyes to what's already true? Like, what yes. is this deeper reality we're invited to experience, even in the busyness?
Yes. Well, I think it's as simple as taking a breath right now. because I'm already off on the freight train of my day. And then coming back to just a place of awareness in my body. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? And returning to the present moment, returning to my physical sensations and what's right in front of me. And then I could put some theology around it, you know. But that's what it is. It's returning and receiving the moment. And I think that's what Jesus helps us do. I think that's what many of the mystics help us do, is to, as one teacher, Jim Finley, puts it, place ourselves in in a posture of least resistance to grace. So how can I show up where I'm least resistant to that divine inflow of grace that's always around me, and any sense? And you're right, you know, we can use words like trying or strive, but it's not. It's ultimately a letting go. So any practices, and it might be fun to talk about the role of contemplative practice and spiritual discipline alongside the tension of this letting go and receiving of grace. But really, it's a receiving of grace. And sometimes when I sit down to do my morning meditation, I'll receive that grace, and sometimes I don't, and I receive it while I'm just washing the dishes or picking up the kids or having a conversation with my wife, or I'm walking my dog, or I'm out in the yard. So it's both and, I would say.
On page 69 of his book, The Holy Ordinary, Mark Longhurst writes, quote, "People who discover the holy ordinary are people who allow wonder and praise to sing through their lives." My son, he recently learned to ride his bike without training wheels. And so we've been visiting a trail nearby that goes alongside a river close to our house. And he enjoys riding his bike, and I enjoy running alongside him and getting a little workout in. And the other day we went to the trail, and my son immediately noticed that some of the leaves from the trees had begun to fall on the path. And as he biked and as I ran, he kept wanting to stop and pick up the leaves, especially Spider-Man leaves, he calls them, which are simply red. He's obsessed with Spider-Man, so if anything's red, that's he describes it as Spider-Man. And I'll be honest, I mean, I found myself a little aggravated. I had a run to complete, right? I needed to get my heart rate up. I needed to get my miles in. All these things kind of going through my mind. And that was one of the objectives of going on the trail in my mind, was to kill two birds with one stone. I could do something that I loved, run, and he could do something that he loved, bike, without his training wheels. And even better, we got to do these things together. But stopping every 50 feet or so to pick up leaves was not something that I expected. It's funny, isn't it, how linear we can become in our own thinking. Even that notion of killing two birds with one stone is all tied up in the American ideal and idol, I'd say, of productivity. We were on the trail, and there was a clear goal, clear purpose, in my mind. But meanwhile, it was my son's wonder and praise that was singing through his life, as goes the quote from Mark's wonderful book, that was inviting me to become more childlike in my own disposition as well. And so maybe I didn't handle things the way I wanted to that time, but I think next time I'm going to try to remain more open to the fact that my heart rate may not increase as I had hoped, but that it might expand nonetheless in this practicing of presence. Now back to the conversation. But would you explain receiving grace as essentially being aware of the blessed reality that you're experiencing, or like how would you define that?
Good question. For me, receiving grace is getting out of the way to taste the holy ordinary, the sacred reality that is always present, the deeper dimension of life that is life. But I don't want to also say that my awareness that my awareness of it is dependent on even feeling it or experiencing it, because it is. And sometimes, and it's holding me, whether I'm aware of it or not, and whether I'm participating with it or not. And I think part of the contemplative invitation is to ask, how can I place myself in that posture of being aware of it, of participating with it, of receiving it as much as possible, while being faithful to my life responsibilities. And so I think of, I've got a really beautiful yard, and there's a little creek that runs near our house. We've got a couple chairs out there, and so sometimes my wife and I will go sit out there, or I'll go sit out there, and the stream, the water is so just incessant, and it's not a fast brook, it's just a trickle. It's sometimes, if it rains, it's faster. And on the other side of our house is a busy road with a lot of cars. But if I go out there and listen to that brook, and I can't hear the cars, or I might be aware of the cars, but they don't seem to matter. So I just use that as a metaphor for tapping in to what is that deeper stream of God, divinity, love, grace, however we want to describe it, holiness.
Yeah, you're bringing up something really important, I think, because when I first began kind of venturing into this mystical contemplative path, there was part of me that kind of correlated mysticism, contemplation with like this kind of blissful euphoria that, in the Franciscan space, like you think of Saint Francis of Assisi and brother sun sister moon, like frolicking like through the fields, and like this divine oneness with God and pure happiness. And in my experience, and I'm sure it's different for everyone, but in my experience, the contemplative way, it feels sometimes there are those real blissful moments of connectivity. Like the other day, I was giving my kids a bath, and I was checked out. I wasn't present. I was thinking about something at work, thinking about emails I needed to send. And then I was just like, hey, do what you just said. Like, hey, let's pause. Let's like really experience this. And then I became aware of all the hilarious things my son was saying.
Yes.
Yeah. So sometimes there are those moments where it does come rushing in, and you're like, gosh dang it, life is so beautiful. But then there are other moments where, for me, it feels more like emptiness, in the sense that maybe you're next to like a creek that you're talking about, or, listening to the ocean, or just sitting in your office in the silence. And I guess I would explain emptiness as letting go of all these things that I'm trying to control. And that's a disorienting kind of thing. It is freeing. It is liberating in a sense. However, it's disorienting. I don't know. Are we kind of hitting on the same thing, or what would you add to this notion of emptiness and letting go in contemplation?
Well, that's good stuff. Yeah, for me, that letting go is a place of grace and emptiness. So it doesn't mean I'm feeling grace or feeling blissful, but that emptiness, and I guess that's part of my Christian faith, which is that the emptiness, it has a personal depth to it of love, and at the center of the universe is love, is part of my belief, and so so that emptiness is a letting go of, could be thoughts, could be obsessions, could be to-do lists, and just awareness, just present moment. However, I do want to put in this conversation, it's not separate from suffering. And because I think we could, in contemplative speak, we could also bypass suffering and say, oh, the holy ordinary is whenever it's blissful and happy. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think that the holy ordinary is in the midst, right smack dab in the midst of all the suffering, all the grief, all the pain, and even paradoxically, in our lack of experience of it. So it could be the emptiness is, I want to experience God's love or God's grace, and I'm not experiencing it. That too is, and this is John of the Cross, the dark night of the soul. That too is a graced experience in this bigger sense of participating in that emptiness, which is also love. So that dark night of the soul is a very important contemplative teaching for me. I think of my own periods of depression when I was younger. I think of anxiety. I think also of just the tremendous amount of suffering that the world is facing. And I don't want to live a privileged contemplative life, insular, that is separate from, disconnected from the catastrophe of climate change, the catastrophe of, I'm going to say, genocide in Gaza, and it has to all be connected, and that's really important for me, because if it's not connected to the suffering and the real oppression that is happening in the world, then I don't know what it's for. I don't know how it matters, other than to just make me feel better, and get through the day. And that, I'm convinced, is not the gospel of Jesus.
Yeah, no, that's a great segue as well. I mean, you write on page 29 that contemplation is all about how one sees and shows up to reality. And then you continue later on, if, as Thomas Merton intuited, the world is not out there, but in my deepest self, then contemplation is not a flight from the world, but flight to the heart of the world, which is what you're getting at.
Yes.
And then you continue, which is at the very same time the heart of God. So can you go a little bit deeper into that idea of showing up to a reality that is not centered on myself, but is actually connected to all that is around me, to the sufferings on the other side of the world, to you were going in that direction, but that is a profound concept, that because this is the last thing I'll say, like contemplation, I think it gets a bad rap because at its worst, it becomes like narcissistic.
Yes.
And Merton's writings sometimes feel that way, where it's like, I mean, I'm very grateful for him, but it's like, dude, you are like just writing almost obsessively about like your own interior landscape. But then the whole architecture of his writing is, he does not write as if he's a monk cloistered from the world.
Right.
He writes as if he's living in the middle of New York City because he's so in touch with the sufferings of the world. So all that to say, anything you would have to add there?
Yeah, Thomas Merton's such a great example of this, because I also think his relentless quest for self-knowledge, and viewing his own life as a laboratory of contemplation, and his willingness to write about that and share his journals, was I can't prove this. I'm not a Merton scholar, but I want to say that it's connected to his ability to write about nuclear war, racism, and nonviolence, and to do so with such depth and precision that we can read it decades later and it feels somehow still relevant, even though some things, aspects of it might be outdated. He touched on a reality that still that feels deeply true and almost timeless, which is profound. I mean, that we got to live in the previous century of such a person. The other thing I would say is, I would hope that this quest would open me up to, it would sensitize me, would somehow lead me to solidarity with people who are suffering in my own community and across the world. Hopefully that takes place in certain actions. Sometimes I experience the limit more often, the limitations of what I'm able to do. I feel passionate about any number of issues of marginalization and suffering. And I'm more aware of my powerlessness in certain areas. But hopefully it will crack my heart open to the interconnectedness of suffering. And I think somehow that I'm just thinking of like a simple example of having a conversation with my wife, and she brings up a response that is different from me, and I could defend and try to be right, but there's something in the contemplative posture that and my therapist would be really happy that I'm saying this, that leads me outside of myself. That invites me to say, what am I feeling? What's my feeling? But also, what are you feeling? And what is your reality? And then, and that this life is full of mutuality and relationship. And so I want to be present to my wife, to my kids, empathetic in that way that comes alongside and suffers with them. And that also, that's not separate from the rest of the world's suffering either. It doesn't mean that me, you, any of us are called to do all things, but that somehow we are not shut down, that somehow we are reading the headlines and our hearts are breaking too. And we're not disconnected. We're not letting it crush us. We might go through periods where we are crushed of grief, where we lose somebody, or we go through an illness. But we are also tied in and tapping in to the joy, and the seasonal nature of that holiness, which encapsulates the dark night and its depth, its suffering, but also its delight and its bliss and its joy. So not bliss that bypasses, but bliss that still is bliss, and that is because life is amazing. Even though, as Wendell Berry said, even though choose joy even though you've considered all the facts. Something like that in one of his great poems.
Yeah. Gosh, man. Yeah, there's a lot there. One basic question I had was, would you say that at the heart of reality that we are invited to experience or become aware of is holiness? And then if so, what is holiness?
Wow, that's a great question. Yes, but I think how I understand holiness is very different from how I might have grown up. I grew up in a evangelical tradition, and I'm very grateful for that tradition, teaching me the Bible, creating passion for the gospel, and holiness in how I learned about it was separate.
Same. Yeah.
Was division. It's holy when it's, I don't know if any of the listeners or you're familiar with the Christian contemporary music scene, but I grew up listening, and I remember
DC Talk, Newsboys, Audio Adrenaline. You want me to keep going?
Okay. I saw all those guys in concert. But I remember going to a youth conference, and I think I write about this in the book. I remember going to a youth conference, and I was listening to Pearl Jam and Nine Inch Nails and all these bands, and then I went to the conference. I went to some workshop, and I was like very passionate about my faith, and they were using all my tapes by then, so that dates my age, in my 40s. But all my tapes were like being used as examples of the satanic music, of what not to listen to, what's not holy, what's not sacred, and so. It's been a real quest for me to understand holiness in a way that leads to union, to one sacred reality. That holiness is actually eradicating the divisions. And it doesn't mean that there's not systems of evil and oppression, and it doesn't mean we're not smart and discerning about all that stuff, but it means that it is one reality, that holiness is wholeness, and not be ye holy as separate from the rest of the world. As Merton says, the world has a place at the center of my being as well. I'm not separate from the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that is such an important that's such an important concept that you're diving into, because I do think that when most people hear the word holy, at least for me, for a long time with my own evangelical background, the thing that ran through my mind was be better. Like you need to be better. Mm-hmm. You either need to, I've mentioned this before, but on the podcast, but it's like you either need to stop doing what you're doing or start doing something that you're not doing. Like it was always tied to, and why should you do that? Well, because there's separation between you and this ultimate deity who is perfectly holy. And then that's how you get into judgment, which leads to self-judgment, which leads to a very low view of oneself and a frail identity. But what you're saying, and just let me know if I'm tracking or not, but holiness is unitive. To enter into the holy ordinary, or opening one's senses to experiencing the holy ordinary, you're kind of becoming aware of the depth and beauty of life, but also your own connection to everyone and everything in this world. Am I tracking there, or what would you add?
Yeah, I would say that holiness is unitive, and from a mystical perspective, that the mystics lead us towards a unitive vision of interconnection, and it's not to glamorize the mystics either, that it sort of bugs me, we read about the mystics were so enlightened, they had their stuff too, and they're all in their culture, they struggled with their own time and limitations, but there's a unitive vision that it is one world, one holy sacred world, and we're all a part of it. It's a mutual relationship at the heart of reality with God and people and the earth. And how cool is that? And that is that's been so liberating for me in discovering my own spiritual quest and theological exploration. And one thing that I heard you say is that there's a certain version of holiness where it says God is I'm supposed to live separate and do better, and God is separate too.
Yes.
I think this, what I say, mystical contemplative holiness means God is not separate either. And I don't have to do better. I mean, doing better is great. Like, I hope we all can do better, but it's not in a striving way. It's just in a participation way. So because God is not separate from this web of relationship either. God is not separate from me sitting outside by my stream, and God is not separate when I'm having a disagreement with my wife, or a kid is having a really hard time and it's getting tense, or I'm in a traffic jam, and I'm late for something. God is not separate from my experience, from the world's experience. And that means that we don't have to be separate from God, and we don't have to do better so much as we have to. And I don't even want to say we have to. It's less about doing better than just receiving.
On page 51 of his book, The Holy Ordinary, Mark Longhurst writes, quote, "The Bible simply assumes we live in a universe in which the veil between heaven and earth is thin, and heavenly intermediaries or messengers frequently traverse the boundaries." End quote. This notion of what ancient Celts called thin places has been a topic that has intrigued me for years now. And I think it has captivated me because it's such a challenge. I remember realizing I was in a thin place years ago when a mentor took me to a hole-in-the-wall music bar in Charlotte, North Carolina for the first time, called the Double Door Inn. I wasn't sure what to expect when he took me. I didn't know much about blues or soul at the time. I did not like jazz, but I quickly learned that the inside of the place was pure magic. It was perhaps my first experience with a contemplative kind of seeing, at least one that I could name. And it felt as if, it really felt as if in this place I was seeing reality as it is. When I learned that it was going to be closing, I decided to go several times a month its final year and write a book about the spiritual truths that I and its patrons found in this thin, unassuming place. I think, or hope at least, that it will always be a symbol for me of the potentiality and thinness that can exist in the ordinary, in the spaces or places that I pass by or pass through, thinking there's nothing there to experience or enjoy. As Thomas Merton famously wrote, "The gate of heaven is everywhere." Now back to the conversation. Yeah, because in that receiving of grace, then the fountain of grace and beauty and goodness is kind of flowing through you. Like you said, you're participating. That's a great word. Yeah. You mentioned we've hit on this a couple times. You've hit on your own journey. Can you dive into your spiritual quest a little bit?
Yeah,
It shows
sure.
up throughout your book. Like, did you mentioned all the like Nine Inch Nails? Didn't you burn those CDs or tapes or
Yes.
something? Yeah. But
Yeah.
how did you end up arriving at the mystics and then contemplation? I'm very curious about how you found yourself into this, how you found yourself in this space.
Thanks for that question. Well, just one door led to another, one question led to another, one
Mm,
experience led to another, one person led to another. I grew up as a pastor's kid in rural Michigan, evangelical, as I mentioned earlier, and I really spanned the gamut. Went to an evangelical college. Went to a fundamentalist school for missionary kids in Germany. And so I've seen a whole spectrum of Christian denominations, Christian experiences. I went to Harvard Divinity School, which was a place of real deep ecumenism and interfaith and human, so folks from all walks of life there, where I got to meet and study and learn from, which was very helpful and eye-opening, heart expanding. I went to a charismatic church for a while, so I've spent time in the charismatic movement a little bit. But then I became ordained in the Disciples of Christ denomination first, and then with the United Church of Christ, served United Church of Christ churches, really because it was a big enough umbrella to hold my questions and my political convictions of social justice and to live that out. I have found, but the mystical quest, I didn't really find it in the UCC. I didn't find it in evangelicalism. I found it through discovering the work of Richard Rohr in the Center for Action Contemplation, which is where I now work, and really just going on various retreats and reading books, and then going to conferences, and that opened up my theological mind. I started a meditation practice with not a lot of guidance, and I kind of was just on my own trying to do this for a while and finding like-spirited people wherever I could. So, you're a pastor in the UCC and you're into centering prayer too. Oh my gosh, you're learning Lectio Divina too. Let's talk. That's so cool. But I really didn't have a community in which to practice or live this out, which is why I'm so passionate about a community that I'm a part of called the Community of the Incarnation, which is, and there's a nonprofit umbrella called the Center for Spiritual Imagination, which is a vowed path. Well, it offers multiple ways to get involved and be on a contemplative journey in community, but it's a path of deep commitment for people like me, like you, who have jobs and are seeking a contemplative life in the chaos of the world, amidst the chaos of the world, and are not able to live a cloistered life, but are seeking that heart of integration of contemplation and chaos, or whatever the right word is. And so that's been really helpful to me in the last several years, is really realizing, it's one thing to read books. It's one thing to do a practice on my own. It's one thing to even go on retreats. And it's one thing to have a spiritual director. But really, and this is what really animates me, is I think forms of community and accountability are really needed to help folks like me live this life with integrity and accountability, because I really think that this is a deep path that brings up all our junk. And if we're not in therapy, we're not in spiritual direction, we're not in some community, then I really don't. Then the risk of bypass is very great, and the risk of even talking about contemplation in a disembodied, inauthentic way is very great. And that also leads to, in my opinion, to a disconnection from the suffering of the world, and from injustice and oppressions happening right next door in my community. So, does that make sense? I'm happy to go in any of those directions.
Yeah.
I don't know if I probably
No,
gave a
absolutely.
lot of
It's a
stuff
beautiful journey you've been on. And yeah, didn't Merton say something one time along the lines of like, hey, just because you're an introvert doesn't mean you're a contemplative?
Exactly. Just because you've read contemplative books, it does not. And I've had to learn this because I read them all. Read all the books. I read all the Thomas Keating, Cynthia Bourgeois, Richard Rohr books. I've read them all. Thomas Merton, and then I've started studying Julian of Norwich, John of the Cross. These are my heroes. But just because I've read books does not mean anything. It might mean I can talk cool theology, but it does not mean anything in terms of my lived experience unless I am able to integrate that in some way. And I was not able to, just as I look back on my own life, been on this path for quite a long time now. I don't think I was able to integrate that in a helpful, accountable way, really, until I was in a community.
Hmm.
Whether that was just a couple of people or this more established structured community. We have a collective rule of life together. We do work through the 12 steps, on a regular basis. So so that's what I mean in terms of holding the feet to the fire of what it really means to be alive to this reality of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it back to lived experience. I'm just wondering to make this uber practical for listeners and then for us as well in dialogue with one another. Is is there something recently in your life where you've experienced the holy ordinary and the mundane? Anything come to mind? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Of course. Well, so many.
Yeah.
Let me pause for a minute so I could just, what comes to mind is just having a conversation with my wife last night, and I got defensive about something, and but instead of working with reaction, I was able to take a breath, to feel what I was feeling, and we were able to really have a beautiful conversation and exchange that took us somewhere deeper.
Hmm.
So that it's as simple as that, and it's as simple as working with my defenses and reactions, and my connection to what I'm feeling and what's happening in my body.
On page 82 of his book, The Holy Ordinary, Mark Longhurst writes, quote, "To pay attention to margins is to pay attention to how boundary lines are constructed in our world and our lives, and then to cross those boundaries. The psyche draws boundaries around what it is willing to face, so exploring unconscious desires through shadow work is a way of welcoming the Holy Spirit into our inner margins." One of the many things I really appreciated about Mark's book is how real it is. There are so many spiritual gurus today, both secular and religious, who tend to promise wholeness and completeness if people follow them or their protocols or their steps or whatever it may be. And this, I think I can say, is not the contemplative or mystical path. Mark, in his book and in this conversation, reminds us that the holy ordinary also exists. That the holy ordinary also exists within the parts of ourselves that we dare not go. I love St. Teresa of Avila's metaphor for the soul being an interior castle. I've often thought of the shadowed hallways and dark corners of my own interior castle, spaces within that may require spending some time there. Curiously, I should add, gently, empathetically, in order for the light to permeate even those far off places I fear, or as Mark wrote, may not even realize that I fear or have been avoiding these boundaried places within. On page 39, Mark continues, "Mystics happen to be my heroes, but not in the unapproachable sense. Rather, mystics are meant to remind us of our heart's own capacity." The contemplative path, as Mark explains, invites an awareness of our own heart's capacity. I love that. But often, this requires welcoming the Holy Spirit into our own inner margins. Yeah, well, I appreciate that you shared a moment that is, maybe this is too severe of language, but there's like some chaos there, there's some conflict there, there are difficult things rising up within you as you're having this exchange. I mean, I just think it's a beautiful example of like, hey, this invitation in your book is to everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes beauty comes bursting through into your world, and you're invited to open up your senses and really enjoy that. But then most of the time it's more complex than that. And one thing that we haven't gotten into that I would like to, before we part ways, in and I think this is related, but in part 5 of your book, Transformations, you talk about our insatiable want for more.
Yes.
And I just think of like our attention economy. And like the other day, I keep going back to giving my kids a bath because that's like my one time with them during the work week where it's just me and them. And like the other day, I caught myself just like scrolling through Twitter,
Yeah.
as and it's like, but I don't know, like and again, I'm not beating myself up because it was a long day. Like you need to have you do need to have these outlets of like, okay, I'm just going to kind of numb a little bit and take a deep breath. And however, that's true more often in my life than I would like it to be. And there is this attention economy of where these things are always pulling at you, and that makes a contemplative path very difficult.
Yes.
And this is where desire comes in. It kind of, at least for me, it clouds my desire, and it's like, well, you think that you just want to numb your mind, but actually you're desiring something deeper here.
Yes.
Any thoughts there when it comes to desire, contemplation? Yeah.
Oh gosh, I'm so glad you picked up on that chapter. I'm really passionate about this, and I actually view it as really central to contemplative transformation, because growing in God, and folks in the mystical tradition, all the way back to Origin, have really said it is what you do with your desire. And this is also one reason I love the 12 steps, because the 12 steps are a proven mechanism, model that gives tools to work with our addictive desires. And I use addictive in a larger frame, because we're all addicted. We're addicted to our thinking. I'm addicted to being right, to checking my phone, to any number of things. So we're all addicted. And the quest for more creates addiction culture. We're addicted to fossil fuels. That we could talk about this on global scale and deeply personal scale. So interrupting and channeling desire in the proper way. And what I mean is, I'm thinking one of my favorite theologians, her name is Sarah Coakley. She talks about the right reordering of desire towards God. It doesn't mean desire is wrong. We could have a whole conversation about evangelical repression of sexuality and desire. Desire is not wrong, but desire, if it's only more, will lead to addiction and more suffering. And so part of the contemplative path is to redirect desire, to affirm desire, to celebrate desire, and redirect it to God, to its proper, to limitations and its simplicity, to not regulation of desire, but boundaries of desire, and in those boundaries, it's as simple as, gosh, I really have a sugar tooth, and like I can binge cereal, like you don't know, but like it doesn't feel good when I do that.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. Yeah.
So there's got to be a boundary. It's like maybe just one,
Yeah. Oh my gosh, man. Yeah, that correlation between, I mean, yeah, even going back to my example, it's what I'm craving when I'm doom scrolling is rest.
Yes.
That's what I'm craving is, and not only rest, but a detachment from the loops that have been going in my mind that day. So I'm trying to disconnect. I'm trying to find rest, and but then I put my phone down. Like, that's the other part of the story. Like, I put my phone down during this time. I don't do that all the time, but this time I did. And I found a sense of rest through my children, you know?
Yep.
And I was going to be there with them anyway. So why not be present with them? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's like am I tracking with you? Like, there's like a deeper desire there, but you need the contemplative path to help you to become aware of the deep things in your heart that are calling out to you. Am I? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And people are on different paths. Everybody's exploring this in different ways. And so I'm not claiming to have the right way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what has been really helpful for me is to commit to a rule of life in community that has shared prayer practices that we commit to each day. It doesn't mean we fulfill them perfectly, but it's saying, like, I want this to be a container in which I live my life. And when I do an evening prayer or a compline and a very short examine, I binge less TV right before I go to bed. And I rest. My body rests because there's unmetabolized...
And you binge less cereal.
Yeah, and I binge... Well, nighttime is the cereal binging time, or the extra beer or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
So it's for me, it's that examine practice and an evening prayer practice. And I'm like, often I could really start off, feel connected, like chant a couple Psalms in the morning, do a meditation. But as the day goes by, so that evening practice has really, and that's where I'm working right now. Cause sometimes I often forget, and I love TV and movies. So like, we could talk about the sacredness of that.
Yeah.
But there's also an escapism and a need to rest of scrolling and just getting on our phones. And I just want, but when I do an examine practice or a short evening prayer, it helps me metabolize the day. And by which I mean, it helps me catch up my body and my feelings, catch up with my awareness, and even if ever so slightly.
That's a great way to put it.
And then I can feel my body settle. It's like, oh, I'm settling now. Okay, I can show up, or I can go to bed, but I could be present to my kids and do bedtime with a little less checked outness,
Yeah, it's beautiful, Mark. I do want to be respectful of your time. I know we're coming up on the hour. Is there anything we left out? Anything you wanted to hit on? And then also, final question: what would you offer to listeners here for experiencing the Holy Ordinary?
Oh gosh. Well, you asked such great questions. It's just fun to be in dialogue with you, Stephen, as a co-explorer of this path.
Yeah, it's been a joy. Yeah.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but we each have, what I've found is we each have something that helps us settle and discover that depth. And so there's formal practices, which I'm a big fan of. And I really think it's, I mean, not to be too, dogmatic, but I really think it's actually necessary to have some structured practices. But then there's those practices or just things that we enjoy. It's like playing basketball with the kids. For me, it's going to the movies. Where I my body settles and I'm like, oh my gosh, isn't this great? And so I think it's a balance of finding something in the flow of life that really helps, that really connect, going on walks with a friend, coffee with a friend, whatever it is, walking the dog, playing with the kids, but then also marrying that with some commitments and practices. That's what's been helpful for me.
Well, awesome. I think it's a wonderful invitation to our listeners and to myself as well. I think I'll doom scroll a little bit less today. But thanks for coming on the podcast, Mark. This has been such a joy.
Well, thanks for having me, Stephen. What a gift.
Once again, that was Mark Longhurst, author of The Holy Ordinary, available wherever books are sold. I've linked to the show notes in the description of this episode, and I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Huge thanks to Mark for joining me on Off the Page, and to Father Cyprian Concilio for providing the music for this episode. May you experience and enjoy the Holy Ordinary today and this week. This is Stephen Copeland signing off. Peace and all good.
I will lead you into the desert with me and tenderly speak to your heart.